Hello, everyone. We're gonna get started just in time. So thank you all for coming. So this is the second seminar of the series, but I see many new people. So welcome, everyone. This is the ICARL, which stands for Imperial College Autonomous Reasoning and Learning Seminars. This is our second season of 2024. It is sponsored by InstaDeep, Google DeepMind, and Iconic. This is a series of talks about, initially it was about reinforcement learning, but it's growing into a mix of autonomous agents, game AI, deep learning, a bunch of other stuff. Today, after the talk, we will have some time for in-person networking with the speaker and some food, courtesy of our sponsors. We also have some people online. For those who are online, you can type your questions and we will read them out loud at the end of the talk. And without further ado, I want to say that we are very happy of having today a speaker who is a mix of not only a scientist, but also an artist, an entrepreneur, and a professional actor himself. I'm not going to say anything else. All yours. Thank you very much for coming.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much, Bo. Hello, everyone. I'm delighted to be here. So I'm Piotr Mirowski, and I'm going to talk a little bit about myself, if you don't mind, as a prologue, as presentation. So I did my PhD at New York University, and it was in the lab of Professor Jan Lequin in 2005-2010, at a time when neural networks were not a very popular word. We had to find alternative ways to get published at NeurIPS, like graphical models, anomalous graphical models, or energy-based models, all those things, and never ever use the word AI in that publication, instant rejection. So I did my PhD, graduated in 2010, and then joined for a couple of years Bell Labs, the mythical place that invented a lot of the technology in telecommunications in the mid-20th century. And I was working on very classical robotics navigation, SLAM, simultaneous localization, and mapping. And I was doing it on a chip, like a wheelchair with a computer on top, a Kinect as a sensor. We couldn't afford a LiDAR, and some sonar sensors on top. And here's a demonstration of obstacle avoidance. And I also continued that work doing SLAM on a phone in order to help with geolocalization and optimizing 4G networks. Then for 1 year, and that was 11 years ago, I joined Microsoft to work on the second most popular search engine thing, doing autocomplete, trying to improve it and trying to convince my peers and management to use deep learning to do that. And 10 years ago, I joined DeepMind, Google DeepMind. So at the time, like everyone DeepMind, I was doing deep reinforcement learning. And so I looked into the questions of navigation because I was really fascinated by this. So we started working on the neuroscientific foundations navigations, grid cell and place cells. And we actually built this model where we demonstrated the emergence in LSTM activation units of something that behaved like a grid cell. And then I also worked on deep reinforcement learning in mazes, partially obscured environments where the agent doesn't see everything. And then I built this environment called Street Learn based on street view images to demonstrate navigation in real-world environments. And so we continued that work until 2019, when I switched to weather forecasting. So weather forecasting in collaboration with the Met Office, the problem we were working on was nowcasting, so predicting at a very short-term horizon of 2 hours, every 5 minutes at a resolution of 1 kilometer. So imagine we had to predict it's raining 5 millimeters per hour now over South Kensington, but back in Victoria, it would be only 1 millimeter per hour. So at that kind of resolution. And for this, we used GANs, generative adversarial networks, and again, some study we published in Nature. Then I've been continuing a little bit. My colleagues went on to publish GraphCast, which has been implemented and deployed and recently demonstrated to actually be able to forecast the trajectories of hurricanes. And at that time, I have been working on compressing climate data. So weather agencies have petabytes of data that result of simulations for different initial conditions. And that's how we get those very complex forecasts of essentially how much the temperature is going to rise in the next 100 years. And so in order to store those data, the cost is very high, prohibitively high. Lots of data is discarded. So I was working on autoencoders, variational autoencoders, to compress presentation by a factor of 1,000, paying attention to make sure that we don't destroy information, we don't introduce too much distortion. So I've been talking about algorithmic research at DeepMind and beforehand, but also I've been doing improv and theater quite intensely for the past 20 years. So I was part of this improv comedy troupe called Cherub Improv in New York, where we would go to hospitals and nursing homes, veteran affairs hospitals, to interact with patients and to actually bring them cheer and joy and empathize with them. I also went to drama school part-time when working at DeepMind, and took some roles in some productions at Fringe, Brighton Fringe and Camden Fringe. And I really love theater because of the way it enables us to connect and to express the truth of our own emotions on stage with others. Okay, so for two different subjects here, algorithms, robots on one side and theater on the other. Obviously, this is going to be about robot theater. So robot theater, I think, we can say that it started 100 years ago, 104 years ago. The word robot was invented on the stage, on the theater stage, in Karel Čapek's play O je o, Rossum's Universal Robots, where the robot, coming from the Czech robota, which means work, was essentially a human-made servant to the humans, who obviously ends up rebelling against the human creators. And it took some years before actual robots went on stage. There is the work of, from 2000, the work of Hiroshi Ishiguro and his Geminoid models, very lifelike androids that he brought on stage, for instance, for Sayonara, where the Geminoid F was effectively manually following a scripted choreography, and the actor would adapt to fit with a robot on stage to make believe that there was a play taking place. On the other side of anthropomorphization, so instead of anthropomorphizing appearance, there is a possibility of anthropomorphizing behavior. And this is, for instance, what the group Gob Squad did at the Berlin Komische Oper in their opera My Square Lady, with a little humanoid robot, very clunky, very boyish looking, very awkward. It's progressively learning to actually perform opera with a human cast. And it's actually, it demonstrates very neatly the process of machine learning. There is the work of Annie Dorsen, who brought two laptops on stage in 2010, one each using chatterbots, one trained on Michel Foucault and the other trained on Noam Chomsky, and replicated the 1970s dialogue between the two philosophers, just much more bonkers. There is the work of my friend Merit Moore, who is a ballerina and a physicist, and during the pandemic, she was programming and training using mocap a robot from Universal Robotics to dance with. Or the work of my friend and collaborator in Switzerland, Manuel Hendry at the Zurich School of the Arts, who is building essentially a mask with a projection of a face using metahumans and a chatbot behind, and has an installation where the visitors get to talk to this shrink and essentially get gaslit very irritatingly by the shrink. It's a very funny, in a way, installation. So what's fun with working with robots is when they don't work. That's the glitch aesthetic. It's absolutely delightful. And there was a big revolution in 2016, when 2016, when Andrej Karpathy posted on GitHub char-RNN, the LSTM that could be trained on characters to generate text. Many people in the creative industry picked up on this. So for instance, there was a musical, Beyond the Fence, produced on the West End, where the story was kind of optimized using data science, and up to 33% of the lyrics were generated by char-RNN. So you can imagine that it was really mostly nonsense. And the fact that it was actually a watchable musical was a consequence of the fact that there was a director, a scenographer, and actors who were giving it life and meaning. There's the work of Ross Goodwin and Oscar Sharp in the hackathon that resulted in Sandspring, a film that made absolutely no sense on script, but that was made a film because of humans. Progressively, language models improved in quality and became much more, they started generating sentences that actually make sense, following some consistency. My friend and collaborator Gunther Lösel in Germany has used the original ELIZA from Joseph Weizenbaum, as well as the Universal Sentence Encoder from Google to stage different plays. Then GPT-2 was introduced, and in Prague, the birthplace of robots, a play 100 years later happened, AI, when a robot writes a play, co-written with GPT-2. And then the same year, GPT-3 was used on the production of AI at the Jan Vic nearby in a very interesting, interactive staging with the audience and the actors. The common point between all those pieces of work is that the AI essentially generates nonsense, but the humans pretend it's absurdist and find meaning to it. But of course, as technology develops, it becomes gradually more useful. So this article from 2 days ago shows that Ayat Akhtar, a fantastic playwright who wrote, for instance, Disgraced, has been using it recently in a production as a co-writer, essentially, in his process. And he found it was in some way useful. And of course, he was using the latest version of some popular chatbot. AI, of course, has also been explored in the context of comedy. A paper from last year, when ChatGPT 3.5 was just released, investigated the sort of comedy you can get just by very simple prompting. And what the authors noticed is that, essentially, out of 1,000 generations, these were the same 25 jokes. And the most frequent one was, why don't scientists trust atoms? Because they make up everything. And the sad story is actually that's a normal human joke that was published somewhere on a website. And for some reason, ChatGPT latched onto this as the most salient point. So why research in computational comedy, computational humor? Humor is actually a fundamental challenge with human-level difficulty. And historical attempts have included handcrafted rules, templates, various pun generators. Effectively, language models are pretty good at writing puns. You're very bad at dad jokes. But you can also use it in different cases. For instance, my friend and collaborator, Corey Matthewson, and Thomas Winters, and you can read some of his papers, Computers Learning Humor is No Joke, used it to generate automatically slides, PowerPoint slides that make absolutely no sense, which are used in PowerPoint karaoke. It's a fantastic game, which I recommend to everyone. So in that optic, 2.5 years ago, we were interested in actually investigating what sort of utility we can derive from language models. So bear in mind, this study will feel very dated and ancient because it was originated 2.5 years ago, which means a year before ChatGPT was publicly released, and where language models were not yet instruction tuned. And so Corey Matthewson, Janet Bittman, Richard Evans, who comes from the video game industry, and myself had this paper published at ICARL, co-writing screenplays and theater plays with language models and evaluation by industry professionals. So what we did, we tried to go beyond the glitch aesthetic. Why? Because AI-generated nonsense can only go so far. And as in this Chappell's Perez wrote in her book, Sorry Machines, a good writer creates unsettling prose by design, not by accident or failure of expression. So you can't possibly compare the nonsense generated by a language model to Harold Pinter or to Eugène Ionesco, which is intentionally absurd. So what we tried to do was to increase the coherence and the consistency of the language models, and went back to the classics. Aristotle, who devised in his essay Poetics, the structure of drama with 6 elements: the thought, the theme, the overarching theme, and then the list of plot points following some trajectory and characters, and then the dialogue, of course, and then the melody, if it's, and the spectacle, how it's actually staged. So we focus on the first 4 elements, and we thought that language models should be prompted in some sort of interactive but also hierarchical way, starting from the log line, which is supplied by the writer and rewritten to generate the characters, and then to generate the plot, and then to generate locations, only then to generate the story itself. So sort of a chain of thought like prompting, which was pretty new at the time. And in terms of plot points, well, I mean, in the Western literature, there are lots of examples kind of derived from Aristotle. The most common structure is the Freytag pyramid, with an exposition, inciting incident, and then a series of complications result in a climax, and then following action going to a resolution and a denouement. And that's the end of the story. Or in mythology, there's always the hero journey. Like in Star Wars, there is an ordinary world, and then you meet a mentor who shows you something, perturbs you from you every day, and then you're driven to adventure, go into the abyss, and come back transformed. And that's the end of the story. Of course, this is very Western. There are alternative ways of writing stories, which we didn't explore at all in our study. But so, as I said, it all just relied on using language models. At the time, we used Chinchilla by DeepMind, because it was a very good language model at the time. And we would start with a log line, try generate some titles, and then see what characters are generated. And then hierarchically generate a plot, and then the location descriptions, same dialogue. And we wrapped this into a collab, which we then used with writers who could interactively write and rewrite the various elements, and essentially end up in a different kind of writing cycle, which is very hierarchical. So now what was interesting was to explore the usefulness for the writers, AI as a creativity support tool. So what we did, we reached out to 15 industry professionals, playwrights, actors, producers, directors, who some of them were from Hollywood, some of them were from the British stage. And we targeted people through our network who had some exposure to AI, who had experimented with AI in some way. Of course, they were hired on a professional industry rate for 2 long interviews that included a writing session with LLMs, with our Dramatron tool. Dramatron is the name of the tool we designed. And then basically a focus group interview, I mean, a one-on-one discussion, and a survey, qualitative survey. And so here are our responses aggregated. So 2 years ago, that's before ChatGPT, those writers would be very surprised by the outputs they could get out of LLMs. They quite enjoyed it. They had mixed opinion about collaboration, but they definitely didn't find they owned the material, or they were proud of the material, or they found it an easy process. We actually looked a little bit into the composition of who found this process collaborative. And unsurprisingly, people from improvisation or TV or film who are used to writing in writers' group, to sharing ideas with others and to bounce ideas with others, actually found using LLMs easier than a playwright who writes in a totally different way, often originating with some ideas that they start making into a play. And these are some of the thoughts that they formulated. So they found that the Dramatron or language model could be useful for inspiration. I think we've heard about a lot. Word building. We always hear about AI, that it's to put words on a page. Okay, I mean, that sounds very banal, I know, because we had exposure. I mean, this was 2 years ago. But the interesting thing is Dramatron writes what they would not write, but want to read for analysis. And I want ideas that a human couldn't possibly have. This is the interesting part of AI for creativity. It's not a replacement, it's the supplement, it's the exploration of something uncharted. They did like the absurdity and of the suggestions. However, of course, we found it was derivative. Of course, we found that it can't possibly write a complete work. because of logical caps, lack of consistency, common sense, motivation for characters, lots of biases, sexist and cultural appropriation, and also it was very linear, very literal. And I think that's what we notice when we use language models today. They just do what we tell them to do, effectively. So very predictable. Lack of nuance and subtext. It will never write Casablanca or Wonderful Life. It might be able to write genre-boxed storytelling, Netflix, basically. So that's one possible use of language models, to get inspiration, to put word on pages. But what if we actually use them as part of a performance? So one of the aspects of our evaluation was when we put them on stage. So one of the playwrights was actually directing the Edinburgh Fringe Festival productions of plays by Box. So that's something he created, which was a variation of another thing he was doing before, where he would take improvisational actors with classical theater acting and give them a script, like literally 2 minutes before the show. They would open the script, never having seen it before, and they would cold read it for half an hour, and then the script would run out. They had to discard it and continue the improvisation. Now, using everything they saw in the script as elements of world building. So here we can see the beginning, whereas they still have the script, and of course the costumes also provided by the, and then at some point the script is discarded and the actors persist in the world they have created alongside the LLM generated script. Well, and when we say LLM generated, effectively what happened is that the writer used for 20 hours a tool to write 4 different scripts and had a lot of editing, lots of rewriting, essays and generations, and finally arrived at something that was kind of okay to be staged at a festival. The audience reaction, people really liked it. And the critics found it was a very nice application, and they really praised, they were looking for hearing the voice of the AI, and also the latter fact that the actors had enough to work on to build the second half of the show. So I'm going to present here a second paper, which is related to my own work. That the first one was done at DeepMind with Corey Matthewson. The second one was still done with Corey Matthewson and first authored by Branch and others, but it was outside. It's my theater company, Improbotics, designing, evaluating language models for co-creative improvised theater. Improvisation. It's about making stuff up without a script. It can be comedy, it can be music. It relies on practice. To improvise, we actually have lots of rehearsals. And maybe not as much as jazz musicians, but still quite a lot of rehearsals, because you learn to channel your instinct and your cultural baggage. And you also learn to just stop the voice in your head that says no. There is this yes and principle, which is effectively about accepting your own idea as valid and also accepting other people's ideas. Instead of denying the reality of what just happened, you just build on top and you see where it takes you. And one of the fun things in improv is actually making it worse. Someone has a headache. Oh dear, I've seen that once. And then it just gets worse and worse and worse. And at the end, there is a cataclysm happening and it's hilarious. Improv is doing the most obvious thing without thinking. And it's also been used by researchers in computational storytelling as a benchmark for intelligence. It's real-time dynamic problem solving. And here are pictures of 2 big theoreticians of improv, Keith Johnstone and Viola Spolin, who essentially insisted on how improvisation is about behaving like a 6-year-old child. Again, there's lots of great improv you can see in London. You can see the Showstoppers. Actually, once a month, they are on the West End. They improvise for 2 hours a musical, completely made up on the spot. Everything is made up on the spot, and there's a live band, and they are just amazing. You can also see Ostentatious, a fully improvised Jane Austen novel that was with a title made up on the spot based on suggestions, and it goes in strange places. In Bristol Improv Theatre, Murder She Didn't Write. They improvise a murder mystery. They have no idea who the murderer is. They figure it out during the improv, and at the end, oh yes, of course, this is the murder. So it's very fun. And then what happened for me, I started doing improv in '99 in French, and then I switched to English when I moved to the UK and then to the US. I noticed that there was a very strange similarity between improv and machine learning. It's about doing the most obvious thing. Like machine learning is the expectation of likelihood, maximization of likelihood. And in improv, we just sample, in a way, from our model of what should happen next without additional control. And I think the parallel stops here, but that was enough to get me thinking about bringing these machines on stage. So I did the most obvious thing, which was to program a chatbot. So in 2015, I started doing it, and then in 2016, it was ready for going on stage. I basically used an LSTM with some extra topic model inputs to keep more consistency. And I trained it on the dialogue from 100,000 films, open subtitles. So at the time, it was a lot of data, like 1 billion words. Yeah, I mean, it took me like a month on a GPU on the Amazon cloud to get it to work, to train. So once it was trained, I deployed it on a laptop, and I added a robot, this little humanoid robot from JD Humanoid from Easy Robots, very cheap, $100. 16 servos, and I coded up the behaviors, basically using stop motion. And the voice was just the Apple voice, Daniel, if you want to know. And I called it Alex, Artificial Language Experiment, and I chose a gender-neutral name by design. So I started doing shows, and then I met Corey Matthewson, who had the same idea. He was in Canada doing a PhD at the University of Alberta in robotics. And he also did a show with a chatbot. His motivation was that good improvisers look good on stage, great, but the best improvisers make somebody else look good on stage. He would do this show called 50 Minutes of Fame. Everybody stand up. Okay, now who has done improv before? Sit down. Who has done public speaking before? Sit down. Who has already spoken to someone publicly before? Sit down. You have never done that. Okay, come on stage. We're going to revise. I'm going to make you the finest person on earth. And that's just, improv is about gift giving, making the other person look good. So he wanted to do that with a robot. And we connected. We started improvising together. We started working remotely, doing Zoom over Hangouts, over Skype. We had this show in 2017 called Binary Square with 2 language models and 2 robots, 2 theater audiences, 8 time zones apart, or so we thought, because he was in Portland, Oregon, I was in London. So the thing is that there is a time in year where the time zone different daylight savings is not the same between the North America and the UK. We realized it the day before. So we realized the day before our shows will not be actually simultaneous. That should be important now. So we had to do some scrambling around to rearrange things. And then the previous show overran, so we couldn't actually set up the microphone levels properly. So the speech recognition was not actually working. And then there were other things that happened. Oh yeah, the robot literally crushed and burned on stage. Smoke coming out and like, yeah. The photographer came, you see me covering in sweat. And the reviewer came. 2 stars, chaotic, never work with robots. Did we listen? Absolutely not. We continue. So what we did in 2018 was to create this company called Improbotics, like Improbotics. Well, there is a story, anecdote with Imperial Robotics. I think we have a lawsuit against Imperial College to get back the Improbotics. Anyway, so cease and desist. Anyway, what we did is we decided to replace the robot by a human being who gets the lines from AI sent via an earpiece and repeats those lines in a most naturalistic way, adding timing and adding emotional interpretation and essentially even choosing the correct line and interpretation, making some corrections. And we essentially changed improvising with robots to a new form of actor training. So this company has done 300 shows, I mean, we did the Fringe 3 times. We did many festivals around the world. Corey has improvised in Edmonton, a rapid fire theater, in Montreal. There is a person, when I was running auditions, someone flew in from Stockholm. Okay, well, I guess now you're the director of Improbotics Stockholm. You're part of a team. So she created a company in Stockholm, and then somebody else did the same in Antwerp and goes to schools to teach about science and robots and comedy. And we also, because Corey was doing a PhD, he basically made it his PhD. And we published a lot of papers in computational creativity venues on various aspects of a Turing test, among others, on Dadaism. During pandemic, we did teleimmersive improvisation. And how am I with time? Oh my God. So Edinburgh Fringe 2023, that's our poster and our. This is a picture published in Financial Times of our performance. So we can see it's still robot. I mean, we're still a little robot because we keep it to start the show. And the cast of human beings and me typically on the laptop prompting furiously and trying to control the whole thing. And then it's just improv comedy. So Edinburgh Festival Fringe in itself. Well, it is the largest English language theater festival and comedy festival in the world. There are about 4,000 shows altogether, 60,000 performances of those 4,000 shows, 2.5 million tickets. Edinburgh is basically transformed for the whole month of August. Of course, there are showstoppers there. Every night they play out to 700 people, sell out audiences. It's a giant party. It's everyone is getting reviews and posting the 4 or 5-star reviews everywhere. But it's sometimes very friendly and a good community between actors. And so we had 26 performances because we were there for 4 weeks daily. One day. 21 cast members joined altogether. We sold close to 1,800 tickets. We had 70 people coming every night on show on average. We even managed to sell out a few times. And these are pictures of the cast and us rehearsing, practicing, having fun. This is Boyd Branch, the lead author on that study. He's a lecturer at the University of Coventry, and he did his PhD on teleimmersive improvisation at the University of Kent. This is the venue, Gilded Balloon, a fantastic venue, which is basically the university building transformed into 20 theaters for the summer. And that's how a theater looked like, and the entrance to the theater. So what we explored in our paper were different aspects of using LLMs on stage. The first one was the idea of simultaneous interaction of multiple humans with AI. So we all know, talking to a chatbot, you press the button and then you say something. And then at some point you stop talking and it responds to you. Okay, do you think it works on stage? No. So what we tried to do was to have a setup that actually works in live performance with many people around. And at that time, our system consisted of the following things. So we had speech recognition running continuously on stage, and we tried different alternatives with one single podcast microphone or everyone wearing a microphone with radio transmitters. Then the system was generating large language model generated lines. And we had a curator in the loop, someone who actually picks what's funny and what's also not very offensive in a bad way, and also choosing the right timing to pick. And so that curator standing over there was holding a tablet with those lines generated by a language model. And once selected, the line would go through a radio into the ear of a performer, who would then deliver the line in the most logical, sensible way, so that the scene can move forward with a human actor, like the human actor, who is basically trying to make it work. And yeah, sometimes we even had reactions like next door. So the AI operator, so that's me typically, prompting on the laptop, typing, let's say the name of the main actor, the name of the AI, now some line of dialogue, manually or using speech recognition, and then scene descriptions to add additional context for what happens, what's the relationship, what's the style in which the line should be delivered, etc. Generates all those responses for control. The human envelope curator sees the tablet and chooses the lines that make sense. Can also select be more punny or be more snarky to like additional prompting to the system. And then everything works. So this all seems very clunky, but bear in mind, it's a Fringe venue. We had a 30-minute get in and get out shared with another theater company. So we had to move a laptop, connect the HDMI, connect the jack, connect the microphone, make sure the projector is correctly as positioned, and the lights, warm up, and let the audience in. So here, lots of attack was actually running on a MacBook M2 with 96 gigabytes of RAM because I wanted to actually run locally Llama 2 at the time as a backup when ChatGPT 3.5 or Palm 2 would be down, which would happen. And we had to have a backup for every backup. And the tech stack, okay, Touch Designer, there was robot control, Whisper for speech recognition. We also had some games with stable diffusion, generated images, like a movie pitch. And text-to-speech, typically standard Apple voices, because we wanted to avoid time wasted on getting the voice out. Timing was crucial. It has to go very fast. So what are the issues in multi-party chat dialogue in theater settings? Well, I described this very complicated system, but I would like to preempt the whole thing with the idea of what we see as dialogue. We all have this idea of dialogue as sending SMS messages. I send you something, you read it, you respond, you write back, and then I send something in response. But that's not how people talk. People talk like in a pincer play, on top of each other. Sometimes they respond to a question that was asked a few sentences ago. Sometimes they just say what they have on their mind. Sometimes they just change subject. And they interrupt each other. So a natural conversation and the kind of conversations we have on the stage or in real life simply don't work with chatbots. And that's also why the interactions with our chatbots are so clunky. They're really damn demanding. So what we did basically is the AI just generates constantly a stream of responses, which might not end up being using, while the actors do their thing. So for instance, here in this game, I introduced meet the parents of the person wearing the earpiece called the cyborg, controlled by AI, is meeting the parent of her date and for the first time. And so we need to be on the best. And I'm asking, so what is the parent cooking? The parent is Julie, okay. So we're cooking some soup with ketchup, okay, whatever. That's the audience suggestion. So the language model starts generating lots of lines, of potential lines that go well with this. And the scene has already started. So Paul walks in, you're gonna love my mom. She's such a cook, very unique in her cooking, quite simple in her cooking. You will like her like I love you. And the language model continues generating. And then the operator has picked, it's warming, comforting, and perfect for a cozy night in. And so the cyborg responds, oh, it's warming, and says, deliver that line. And then Paul reacts to this and says something else. Language model is fed again, and so on, and so on. So essentially, there are two streams of text going on, and the human in the loop constantly picks, sometimes with delay, what best fits the storytelling. So this, of course, has some limitations, but I'm going to address them a bit later. Participatory design. Well, we've been working as a team with professional actors who are not AI experts, but who also see the value of interdisciplinarity and who also want to basically make sure that we have a show that works for the audience. So we had this debate whether we should even use the most recent version of ChatGPT, which is apparently very boring because it's aligned, value aligned, whatever I'm going to reach to talk about this later. But maybe it's not funny enough. We also want to use AI to complement the work of the actors and to be good for idea generation. And the whole setup of our comedy troupe is to use the theater as laboratory to study how actors and audiences respond to real-time AI. So we did also a study where we asked the audience members after each show what they actually thought about what was going on. So what drew you to the show? Curious about robots and AI. Before watching the show, what were your feelings about robots and AI? Curious about them, love them, excited. Okay, that's good. Ambivalent. During the show, I found myself mostly watching improvisers work around the limitations of robots. Okay, that's good. We have a message of the laughing with the human improvisers. What I liked most about the show was watching the robot come up with entertaining and funny ideas, not so much watching the improvisers trying to make sense of a strange and funny idea generated by the robot. Come for the robot, stay for the humans. I mean, people come to see a comedy to see human beings on stage. I felt the robot performed better as well, worse than expected, kind of evenly distributed. The show was entertaining and original. After watching the show, I am more excited about using AI tools for creativity, but less optimistic about robots by themselves as creative storytellers. I think we nailed the messaging. This is exactly what we're looking for. We need the humans to have fun with new tools, with new toys. Watching the show, I found myself rooting for Alex to succeed. So there is still a degree of anthropomorphization that happens towards a little robot on stage. Lessons learned, well, I mean, obviously the human in the loop has to go faster. So we replaced the human curator of a tablet with glasses. So this time it's the actor who wears X-ray glasses, but it could be anything that actually projects lines from a laptop, from a computer. And so the actor makes the choice of which line to say, while keeping eye contact or pretending to keep eye contact. Demand some training. And so then we realized that the quality of the scenes greatly increased because everything was going so much faster. And with some training, it really seemed, sometimes we were surprising ourselves. We asked, okay, who was the cyborg in the scene? We kind of forget because it becomes so good. And also we have individual microphones to track speakers. And how to track speaker? Volume. I tried diarization, doesn't work in the context of the theater stage. Okay, I can say something about reviews. God, what was it? Oh yeah, still have some time.
Yeah, but think of questions as well.
Think of questions. So our reviews were initially going up from very bad to interesting, but then we hit a wall last year with very negative reviews that effectively expressed a lot of fear around AI. And so we had to really work on our messaging of how we communicate about this. In that, interestingly, those reviewers were negative coming from writers, from critics, but not so much from audiences who actually liked the show. We still managed to get some good reviews, like a 5-star from Theatre and Tonic. We introduced other
Shame on you,
aspects
AI.
this year.
Mark, you might think AI can't write wit jokes, but we can try our best.
Sue's been joined by Gillian and Alex from the Improbotics show. Tell us all about the show.
We are an improv team based out of London, and we do live improv with artificial intelligence. Have one of our actors pretend to be a cyborg. They take lines from the AI and perform it on stage. We use some deep fakes. So we take an audience member, they come on stage, and we superimpose their face onto ours, and we explore different versions of them in the multiverse, so to speak.
And apparently, you're a big fan.
I'm Mark Nelson, and I love the Improbotics show.
You're an imposter. I'm Mark Nelson.
No, I'm the real Mark Nelson, I think. Thanks, Gillian and Alex. Thanks, Anesti.
So
Now, our regular reporter, Jamie.
I did a deep fake for the BBC. I'm very proud of that. Anyway, so ethical questions raised by the artist, and that's essentially we're getting to the conclusion. So the deepfake obviously is an example of dual use of technology. I mean, you can use it for fun, like bring some of the audience and actually have some fun interactions. And of course, you can use it for absolutely egregious cases too. Our show last year was during the WGA strike, World Writers Guild Association, which ended up with a good resolution for the artists. Essentially, producers can't use AI to replace the writers. And I think but writers can use it if they want to. I think it's the best of the world, possible worlds. But we had to communicate definitely about ethics during our show. So we ended up being interviewed a lot by The Guardian, the BBC, Scotsman, Sky, discussing concerns about copyright, misappropriation of artists' work, destructive impact on creative economies, devaluation of human creative work, biases. Our personal ethos is to center the humans. But when I was in Edinburgh, I used that opportunity to write another study with DeepMind. Entitled, A Robot Walks into a Bar, Can Language Models Serve as Creativity Support Tools for Comedy and Evaluation of Large Language Models' Humor Alignment with Comedians? And that was published at FACT, the Fairness and Accountability and Trust Conference, essentially an AI conference, an AI ethics conference, last June. So what we did, well, we were, obviously, as I said, we were motivated by finding an answer to the question, should generative AI generate art comedy or serve as tools for artists and comedians? I don't like the first one because it's a logical replacement. Also, it's difficult to evaluate. I like the second one because it's a logical empowerment. It's also easier to evaluate. And what we should do is to ask the comedians. So just like we did already with the writers with Dramatron, we did again with comedians who claim to have used AI in the process. Comedy is all about violating expectations, violating boundaries in the right way. These are examples of shows, fantastic shows that you can see in Edinburgh. And you notice they touch on difficult subjects. They touch on racism, on homophobia, on transphobia, on sexism, on Islamophobia, on anti-Semitism. And you come out of this in a transformed way. Comedy is basically a way to establish an intellectual, emotional understanding, intelligence, anyway, to understand the audience and to understand oneself. I mean, that's one way of seeing a comedy. And obviously, for obvious reasons, you can't imagine that those actors can just swap the materials because it just wouldn't work, it wouldn't be appropriate even. So that's the context in which comedy operates and in which large language models operate too. So in our study, we talked to 20 comedians, 10 at Edinburgh and 10 online. Again, focus groups and writing exercise. And some examples, AI is very bad at this. I don't want to live in a world where it gets better. Or, I think those details spark my imagination. I think I could use them to write something. For the sake of time, I'm just going to focus on some observations. So the creativity support tool was pretty much expected. It will be very PC and not really taking any risks as a sort of bland kind of cruise ship style entertainer, or maybe like something you see in a comedy from the 50s or 60s, but a bit less racist because it was tuned for safety. So it was not very useful in terms of for the comedians, a bit more useful for improvisers in a way. But what was interesting was effectively looking at why it was not useful. So beyond going to the vomit draft and getting some ideas on structure, effectively writers noted that the joke I get is the joke I put in, just paraphrased by the large language model. But sometimes it can get very bad, very generic, straight-laced sort of linear approach. Comedy is about pushing the boundaries. And with this, I don't think I can do it. Typically, the responsibility for what we do with the material is on me, and they're not giving me that agency. Writers felt they should do whatever they want in the writer's room and then think about the audience when they go on stage. And that's the moment where we can actually edit and censor themselves. And language models do it preemptively. But also, there's a problem with political correctness in the wrong way. So, for instance, a Filipino-American comedian who was in our focus group found she couldn't get anything about herself when she was using the language model. And she would change the prompt to a white man, suddenly it would generate a lot. So that felt like cultural erasure for her. And a gay comedian who had some fantastic act, put it into ChatGPT, it comes out straight. And he found it very offensive in a way. So, and also AI wouldn't address the subject of white supremacy or colonialism or terrorism. It would just stay away from all those conversations. It just can't draw of personal experience. That has no idea how to punch up satire or punch down, which is mockery, and that's quite different. And effectively, the conclusions we got from this is that, too late? No. what comedians were expected was a form of community-based alignment. So not have one company making decisions for what is correct or wrong, right or wrong, but rather let a group of people discuss a value system for their own community and use, based on that, tune the safety parameters, just like what a museum does, just like what a comedy club does when they select what is appropriate for them. The broader appeal something has, the less great it could be. If you make something that fits everybody, it probably ends up being nobody's favorite thing. The relational context was missing, obviously, and that's a problem already observed by my colleagues at Google Research, who noted that it was sometimes censoring African-American vernacular speech on Twitter, etc. And obviously, we need human-computer interaction methods. I think, so I had some epilogue with some lessons, but I think I'm going just to skip it. Yeah. Oh, yes. I think this lesson, I think that's my personal take. When I was working on weather forecasting, we were generating different realizations because that's what people working in weather want. They have a dynamical system and initial random conditions, and then they look at different outcomes. Why don't we do the same with language models? Why do we treat language models and chatbots as an oracle given an answer? Whereas every time we hit generate, it gets something else. Why don't we just show to the user the span of possible answers to essentially convince the user that it's not just a voice of reason speaking, it's a stochastic model. But anyway, thank you so much for listening. These are pictures of my collaborators on papers from DeepMind, Improbotics cast, Geomatron study, you have a collab. You've been, thank you so much.
So we have 5 minutes for questions.
Yes,
If you want to go.
in the yellow.
Thank you. A very inspiring talk. I have two questions.
Yes.
One is you haven't talked about future work, which you're working on now. If you could share.
Oh yes, I'm trying to do something stuff for comedy. I'm trying that's outside of DeepMind. I'm working on audience-controlled shows to actually introduce some gaming aspect. And at DeepMind, I'm interested in participatory AI. It's actually working more deeply with artists to actually figure out the rules of that moderation and what is helpful in the context if they decide to use AI.
So I think that segues interestingly into my follow-up. So when we take the writing, right, the poetics coming up with the main storyline and then going through the chain of thought in order to make the narration, and the improv, right?
Yes.
This point where they kind of connect is, for example, a DM for a dungeon master for a D&D game.
Yes.
Right? Have you tried something like a director, a agent that would be a director of a show?
Yeah, that's cool. We tried it with some earlier versions of language models, so that's Improbotics comedy work, and we want like to. That's a good thing to revisit actually. Yes. Yeah. For instance, okay, I'm trying to build a choose your own adventure game on stage.
Yeah. Good.
With the adventure choices generated by AI, and the audience who chooses.
I see.
Yeah. So yes, just behind in the black shirt or black sweater.
I also have two questions. Firstly, do we have anything close towards like a foundational model for humor? Have we? And I guess like have you done any work trying RLHF for humor?
Oh yes, RLHF for oh gosh. Fun thing, Corey and I, when we were doing the shows in Edmonton in 2018, we actually collected, we had a grant, sorry, not a grant, an ethical approval to collect data from the show to train a model. But the problem is that the base model itself was so bad, it was just still my RNN LSTM. So yes, the only problem with that is how you formulate the reward function. Because is it just the laughter? Is it a complex reward structure that derives for how the story ends up unwinding in the future? So we have, I mean, we were thinking of trying it the last summer, but we didn't have time. It was too complex for us. Yeah, I mean I think it's a good question. The only question is how you build the reward structure.
Again, the second question was, are base language models still exhibiting like the sort of same problems with alignment? If you prompt them the right way, can you get them to generate better humor than like fine-tuned, instruction-tuned language models?
So since the study we did last year with comedians, I think there has been so much work on value alignment and safety. A lot of my colleagues at Google DeepMind or gigantic teams are working specifically on that. And I presume it's the same for other other companies that release language models. So the safety has increased. I wouldn't guarantee it's definitely safe. And I think the problem remains the same of choosing, I mean, essentially knowing how to ensure the safety, which is very different based on the context. And I don't think that's a solved problem. I think that's an interesting research problem. Yes. The person here.
So you mentioned training the model using movies, and like for example, the jokes. You said that ChatGPT found it somewhere and hold on to it. So how does copyright and intellectual property play a role into all that?
Oh God.
Sorry, leave me to.
No, it does. It does. So at the time when I was doing this thing, I was using open subtitles because open subtitles were user contributed. And the other thing I had in mind was this is improv. So since there is already an improvised Jane Austen, an improvised musical, where people make up things on stage, it's a little bit different, a different situation from just having a language model generate something that replace. I mean, essentially, there is the question of copyright, I think, and that depends on how you approach this. It depends what use you make out of it. So the use case, and there are always discussions about fair use, which differ based on country. It's different in the US, it's different in the UK. Yes. But yes, I mean, it is a huge problem, and I'm glad that it's being discussed. And I'm glad that there was a WGA strike specifically on that. Yes.
Last question. What do you think is the future with like video gen models and storytelling? So I know you advocate like the human actor, but I guess if one sees like develops like Sora and similar work from Google and so on, I think the changes are quite drastic. So how do you see the future of that?
Well, one way of what excites me about these potentials is interactivity. And essentially thinking of this as a different, as a new format, effectively. So it's no longer cinema or television; it becomes a sort of interactive game. Like in those 90s, they were shipping CD-ROMs with multimedia interactive films, but here it becomes something that's based on that's generated real life. But I think that's a completely new aspect of entertainment that is interesting to explore.
Okay. I think we should stop now. Like if you want the questions that we're gonna have the networking now, but I want to let people because we're supposed to finish at 6. So very quickly, our next seminar will be on the 30th of October with Professor Richard Sutton. For those of you who don't know him, I encourage you to look for him on the internet. Reinforcement learning AGI, you will find. It's the first time he's going to be here at Imperial. We expect it to be very crowded. So for that one, we encourage you to register on Eventbrite, just in case. That will be in 213, the room, right? Claude Theater, just downstairs. And apart from that, we have, if you like all these things that we have been discussing today and what all the other speakers are going to be talking about, we have a reading group going every other week. There is going to be the next session on the 16th of October. Also, for those of you who are doing a master thesis here at Imperial, one of the sponsors, my company specifically, Iconic, is going to be having a few master theses going with us. So if you like, for instance, some of the topics we're going to be touching on, things that have been discussed today, if you want to dive more into it, we're basically doing game and AI. So many of the things you were talking today that I think we're looking into. And that's all. Thank you very much for coming today. It was very nice to have you.
Thank you, Wilhelm.